Hello and welcome to It's Going to Be All Right, the show where we sit and talk about all things writing, academia, and whatever else seems interesting or useful, we think, hopefully useful. I'm Clay.
And my name is Niklas.
And what are we looking at this week?
We are looking at co-authoring. Isn't that the topic?
I believe so.
Writing together.
Writing together forever in peace, love, and harmony. Yeah,
Yes.
you know, this was actually a recommendation. Someone who listens to the podcast.
That's a first.
It is. Well, there's been one other recommendation it's just been a little bit difficult because it's going to take a bit of finagling and reaching out to other people to get some input on, which we do want to do. We will get to it. So this is actually number 2, the second recommendation we've had, but it was just an easier one to do because both of us have some experience with this. And maybe we should preface it by saying that we're going to be talking about a lot of aspects of co-authorship, from co-authorship to publishing in a peer-reviewed journal or a report, for example, all the way down to group essays or group home exams, group presentations, the different ways that you can collaborate with people to produce, a quality writing and something that sort of works together, speaks together, has a unified voice to it. We both have varying experience with this as well, because you, Niklas, have actually been co-authoring on work that is being published. Is that correct? Or is it published? Has it been?
No, it hasn't been published. I'm not really sure what's actually happening with it, because we did a lot of writing just before Corona. And after that, I'm not really sure what has been happening. 2 of the people are not employed at this institution anymore because they have retired, I think. So there's the guy that played the role as editor. He's still there, and then it's me, but I'm not really sure. I think lots of other tasks just ended up taking taking our attention, unfortunately. But I can talk a little bit about the writing process for this particular article.
And even just, the how you cooperate with people, because I don't think it's just all about the writing and who does what aspect of it. But what I think is really important about when you cooperate with people is learning how to cooperate with people.
I mean, that is just as important as the writing aspect, because for this particular project, we had different roles. So my role was creating a theoretical framework, and then the other people would also have inputs, of course. But when we just wrote about a specific topic, I would write about the theory section. 2 of the other guys, they would deal with the results from the experiment that they'd done, and then kind of categorizing things and trying to put it in context with the theoretical framework that I created. And then it was a third person who would help me out a little bit, because she was an expert in certain aspects of the pedagogical platform that we applied to these results. So we kind of had our different things that we were working on, but then we would have these meetings where we would try to, okay, where does this part fit? Maybe we should take this out, and do we need this? And it was one guy, he would kind of go over everything and try to make it so that the language was, what can you call it? Unison, almost? That it was...
unified.
Yeah, unified.
That it's presented in like a singular voice, you could say.
So what actually happened, like the stuff that I wrote, it was kind of picked apart and then reassembled, but then in a different way. And everything was treated in the exact same fashion. And that was clear from the beginning. So no one had any ego attached to anything in particular. That was the process.
So I think you've pointed out a couple of very useful, practical things that would apply to anything from a group essay if you're a bachelor or master's student to group projects at a higher research level as a PhD or a postdoc, or just generally as a researcher, research assistant. Kind of understanding what everybody's role is going to be. So I suppose you need to start out with maybe a good starting point is thinking about, well, what is the goal of this research, and create a unified goal that everybody is working towards. And then you hear this an awful lot too, because I'm going through a stage of my own research where it's important to define the goals and then the objectives, and then, narrow even further and further. So making a distinction then between what is the goal, the outcome that you're trying to achieve, and what are the objectives, the methods, the specific actions that will get you to that goal. And that's maybe also what you could define as roles and responsibilities. So is it important that people have, a different section that they're going to look at, that someone has the responsibility of, in your case, creating the theoretical or conceptual framework for a piece, or it's somebody's responsibility to document all of the methodology that is being done, be that in the field, in a laboratory, or the methodological approach that's being applied by using a theory in social sciences, psychology, education.
Another interesting thing here is that when we divided roles, one of the guys, he was kind of known for being really good at getting funding, getting his projects funded. So he was good at. So he took care of that part, where he would talk to people about their project and write all these different, what do you call them? In Norwegian, søknad?
The application.
Applications, yeah. He would write all the applications because he was always successful with getting funding. So he did that, and once again, he got funding. So we're talking about responsibilities. He was good at that, so he would do that part. Yeah.
And there's definitely... different people have different strengths. Realizing what people do well at and letting them have responsibility for some of those tasks. I often had made the joke throughout, my education that the reason why no one in social sciences really enjoys doing statistics is because we all sucked at math in high school, and so we decided to go down an educational path where we'd never have to do that. And when you end up, then you kind of end up developing skills and competencies in totally different areas of research and communication than people who kind of focus more heavily on statistics. And of course, you find people who come from, the natural sciences and who use quantitative and statistical methodologies more often, who are very eloquent as well. But you'll also meet a lot of people who they love the numbers, but maybe they're not so good about writing. They'd prefer to be on the analytical side. But I guess this is also just what happens in kind of any organization. When you work at a job, you're going to find people who have different roles and responsibilities. But what's great about in a research environment is it's maybe a little bit more horizontal to some degree. You can allow people to focus on the areas that they're really the most interested in. And as a student, as a bachelor or master's student, that's really great, because a group project, for example, if you know what the goal is, well, it should be clearly defined in the assignment instructions.
Yes.
So how you apply your interest to that and unify it with what other people are doing gives you probably a lot more flexibility and room, which can be a really great thing for you to develop competencies and learn about something that you're genuinely interested in. And research projects, it can be a bit different, right?
Sure, but a lot of people have to do things in groups as well. I mean, I know that there's certain programs at NMBU that wants their students to write a term paper or a thesis or something as a part of a group, because that is an important part of their tradition, that you're going to work with other people. And that has some challenging aspects that I think a lot of people don't get they don't really know how to organize it. They don't know how to do it. So there's different ways, and I think this is interesting. At the renewable energy at Mina, they really use Gantt charts. That's like a big thing that a lot of the professors are really into, and they want every student to create a Gantt chart for their master's degree. And a lot of these people work together, so then it gets even more important to have some kind of a plan of the project and how long you're going to work on one task and how they're going to phase over into each other. And yeah, so they kind of implemented a more of a team-oriented strategy when it comes to writing a thesis.
Yeah. And so Gantt charts are a form of time management that walk through specific tasks and completion dates over a calendar period. If you want more information on Gantt charts, we talked about this in our episode on time management. So you can go back and find that time management episode, or use the internet for what the internet is for, not just pictures of kittens and puppies and stuff like that. Type in GANTTCHART, Gantt chart, and you'll learn all about it.
And just search it, just see if you can find anything on YouTube as well, because there's tons of videos that is very detailed about how to create a Gantt chart.
Exactly. So the technical side of it, that it's not that difficult to make. And what a Gantt chart does in a group objective as well is it really helps to handle some of these issues of organization, that people can have predefined milestones or deadlines, that's when some part of the research process needs to be done, so that the whole project and everybody involved in it can move forward. But
what you can also do, which is very, very good, is that you could try to pinpoint where you expect some kind of challenge or problems. And then you could kind of align everybody's schedule that, okay, when we hit this part of the project and we expect some kind of problem, then we all should have enough time that we can address this problem and try to solve it as quick as possible.
Exactly. So I just want to backpedal for 1 second, because you brought up a good point that led us to Gantt charts, talking about when students get put into these groups, they don't really know how to organize. And I remember it from being a student, and I hear it often enough when I help out with courses where there's group work. Oh, why do we have to do group work? I don't want my grade associated with somebody who's not going to do their fair share of the work. Well, part of why group work is a part of some university programs is because in the real world, when you leave university, the majority of us are going to be working in environments where we have to collaborate with other people in the department, other people across the business or company or government department that we work for. You may even need to collaborate with people who are not part of the business or company or institution you work for, and learning how to manage and communicate and balance other people's schedules with your own work
That's usually how it is. I mean, most people don't work solitary, don't work alone. I mean, parts of the day or certain periods, of course, but usually, or at least the way that I work and you work as well, even though you write your Ph.D., you have to communicate with other people. You also work at the learning center, which then we work together. Other people, I mean, it's a collaborative effort, and you need to learn how to balance different tasks and how to align different schedules in able to create the different things that you're expected to create. So I think it's a valuable lesson, but for a lot of students, it's kind of
they just see it as the grade.
They're not used to it. Yeah, they see it as the grade, and they're afraid that some person in the group is going to free ride and then make the whole thing worse. That's one of the main concerns, I feel like.
Yeah. So realizing that group work is work, it's going to take effort on your part, but being able to come together early to do some of these important kind of non-writing skills, get a unified vision of what the final thing is going to look like, the paper or the presentation, set aside, the specific objectives, roles, and responsibilities of what people are going to do early. And this can be things as far as saying, well, each of us needs to write 5 pages. What are you going to write on? What are you going to write on? What are you going to write on? And then coming together at a later point to work collaboratively on developing the introduction, the conclusion. And a big part of it, too, is sort of having a unified voice that I've done it a couple different ways when taking my bachelor and master's. One where I had actually said, hey, everybody, because of the role that I'm taking, we were looking at a wetland reclamation site, and we had to go to a real physical site and document it. I said, hey, it seems like everybody has their own interest to do something on, the water chemistry, and you're really interested in the biological aspect of it, and you're very interested in sort of the geotechnical aspect of how things were graded and the landform was designed and erosion was being controlled. What does that really leave me to do? Because I'm interested in all of those things as well, but somebody kind of needs to go in and look at what were the regulations, how was this all designed and planned, and did the initial plan kind of match what was produced? And that basically involved looking over, one very specific Norwegian law and the design plan. So I had like 2 documents to look over. I realized my workload was so much shorter than everybody else's that I kind of said, well, you can send me all of your documents and I will compile everything. I will take your 5 or 10 page report, and I'm not going to change the information there, but I'm going to just change the phrasing of it, so
the wording
that it,
a little bit.
yeah, so that it fits and it flows, so that we have a cohesive document start to finish. And then we'll sit down and we'll review it together, and we'll make specific changes in case if I made a mistake in your part, and then we'll submit it.
What also happens is that when people are writing different, let's say different sections of a paper together, they have a tendency to write some of the same stuff.
Yeah.
So that's also something that needs to be taken out. And there's multiple ways to do it. Could be a person like you, one who volunteers to be the editor, basically. But I also had this workshop for, I think it was economics or something. Yeah, pretty sure. And I was just talking about how to coordinate group work, and it ended up with one of the groups they had written different sections together, and then they met up, and then they just walked through every sentence together.
I've also
that's
done
also
that.
a way to do it, and it takes a lot of time, but that's a way to kind of create this unified voice and take out information that gets repeated multiple times to get it much more streamlined and get a good logic flow in the entire paper.
Yeah. And yes, that does take time, but I do have to say the times that I've done that on another group paper, just set aside, 3 hours and bring some snacks. If it's a pretty relaxed environment, bring some beers or something and just enjoy going through it and literally read sentence by sentence. And are we all on the same page? Does this make sense? Do we agree? How could we change a part of this? Or where, oh, hey, I didn't read your section, but I talk about the same thing too. So where is it more appropriate? And then you can immediately jump over and remove this stuff. So no matter what you do, it's going to take time and it's going to take effort. But it also comes down to the group of people that you work with as well, because I think that this collaborative sitting and going sentence by sentence by sentence works very well when you have a lot of people who are very detailed focused. And that worked incredibly well for that group when I worked with them. Actually, it was with another former writing advisor who's now taking a Ph.D. over in the UK or Ireland, I believe. Very, very detail-oriented. And because I had worked with her, we knew how each other worked. So that was really easy to apply to our studies. For the other one, it was a bit new. I hadn't met these people before. And it just seemed like, specifically because I knew that my task was not as extensive. It didn't rely on me going to the field multiple times to collect water samples or, index biodiversity using transects or doing a lot of photograph analysis on the site. I just saw that they had a lot more kind of upfront physical work and analysis so you have to also decide, you kind of need to be a bit flexible, I think, in those situations. projects, of course, like if you're working as a researcher, we get up to the level of PhD, postdoc, or you're an actual researcher or research assistant being paid to do this stuff. A lot of those goals and objectives and roles and responsibilities will quite likely be outlined early on in the project. And if not, I would definitely think they should be. So know what you are supposed to do, know what your contribution is. And if you're a PhD, know what your contribution to the project is and what is also your own PhD research, so you don't maybe get kind of double blocked and end up doing two different jobs that can't work, in parallel with each other.
That would be way too much. But there's a lot of things that can happen. I just talked about this thing that I was a part of. Not really sure what's happening with it, and I think that is. I mean, it doesn't have to be a pandemic for something like that to happen. A lot of these projects just kind of collapse before they get anywhere. I feel like people get funding or might get their article published in a journal, and something happens, the team falls apart, you end up doing something that, let's say that you've written a chapter or an article or an essay or something like that, and suddenly the project just fell apart, and then you could use that for something else if you want to, but that also happens. So I think it's important that if you get into a project like that, you need to be realistic when it comes to what can happen to what you have written. It can be changed a lot, altered to fit the text, or maybe it doesn't go anywhere. There's a lot of things that can happen, because a lot of the time, many of these researchers, they already have a lot on their plates.
That's true.
A lot of these projects are quite sensitive, I think.
Yeah. There's a lot that goes into just sort of group management, realistically. Time management, managing personalities, managing expectations that are as equally important, if not more important, than the final writing that you do. So I think when it comes to co-authorship, the biggest thing to take away is sort of what we always say about writing. The hard and really important work of writing isn't writing. It's everything that leads up to being able to effectively write. So all of this sort of background stuff in just management and organization, regular meetings, being on the same page. And I would even say that if you're asked to possibly produce a book chapter, you're going to see a lot of this as well. If you are someone who reads research-based books with different edited chapters, it's rather common that you see people referring to other chapters. And you have to realize that it's not necessarily always that these people are fully reading those chapters, because they might be writing at the same time. So... But what will happen is you're probably having regular editorial meetings to understand what is the core context of what each of the authors are writing, so that I don't have to duplicate things unnecessarily, that I can point and say, hey, but this has been more deeply discussed by this author in chapter 7, for example. So there's also a lot of that going on. And that's a sort of co-authorship where you're responsible to write your own section. And there's not necessarily anyone who's going to tell you exactly what should or should not be in there. That'll be, part of the editorial process.
And a lot of times the other people that is a part of the project doesn't really know, because sometimes it can be cross-disciplinary. So let's say that you have a chemist and then you have an historian working together, producing different chapters for some kind of book. They can't really help each other out that much, because they're not really that accustomed to to each other's discipline. So that can also happen. There's lots of projects that are, a book that consists of different chapters that covers one specific topic, but through a different perspective.
And so it means that you need to be familiar with what people are doing, but you don't necessarily need to be knowledgeable about it. So there's these different forms of co-authorship that happen too, where are you writing a unified piece that everybody is a co-author on, or are you writing a section or a chapter that you are the main author on, and it's edited by 1 or 2 or 5 people who take the responsibility of making sure that there's a unified voice between all of these different parts.
But I think there's an important thing here, because let's say that you have written a section that is a part of a thesis or a term paper or a text. That is quite different from writing a chapter, because different chapters can actually give a little bit of you can have different styles of writing. You can have a different voice that can be entertaining for the reader, that the different personalities kind of show through the text. But when it comes to one text, one essay, one term paper, then it should be one voice, in my opinion. It's very confusing if there's multiple voices in the text.
Mm-hmm.
But with chapters written by different people, then it's a different story.
Exactly. Knowing the type of goal, right? Knowing the objective. And not everybody is going to be in a situation where they're able to just write their own section and, it'll be edited collectively, but you retain your own voice. It's much easier to read a thesis or a peer-reviewed journal article that has a single voice than 2 or 3 or 10 different voices, depending on how many co-authors there are on it. And that
would be confusing.
Yeah. So it also comes down then to realizing what is a good method to create that unified voice. Will there be one person who takes that responsibility? Or will you have one person who takes the responsibility of writing it in a sort of workshop group setting where you talk sentence by sentence, and one person just writes down how you decide you do want to say that sentence and that paragraph and that section all the way through?
I think it depends on a lot of different things. Like, let's say that you have chosen one editor, then that person should get that role because they're good at it. They've done it before. And when it comes to students, that might not always be the case. That maybe no one's familiar with that kind of responsibility. But when it comes to professional research, there is people that usually take on that role in different projects, and they're kind of used to changing the wording, but not the content. And they've done that for multiple projects before. So it depends on the context, I would say, what is the best
Exactly.
approach.
The context, and also, maybe what works best for you, because if the context is going to be very different for a collaborative master's thesis where you and 1 or 2 other students who you're probably friends are working collaboratively. It'll be easier to figure out how you want to do it. If you want to write it all together, if you want to write separate sections, you want to kind of, do a division of labor. And that's really up to you to decide. But the sooner that you decide that in the process, the easier it is going to be, and it'll probably save a lot of arguing later. Now, it gets a bit more... Oh, go for it.
If you are students and if you're writing a thesis together, this is just my personal opinion, but you could write different sections, but I think you should sit together and go through every aspect, every sentence together, because you really want things to... you want this logical flow. You don't want to repeat the same stuff over and over again, and you want these different sections to communicate. So then I think you should sit down together and talk about it. But if it's a bigger team, then you could still do it, but you could also have one editor. But it depends on how comfortable one person is with having that specific role.
Now, all of this changes when it comes to writing a peer-reviewed, academic, scientific type of article. And that is predominantly because there's the lead or the head author and everybody else listed afterwards as co-authors. And this comes down to how the ranking or scoring system goes for how many publications a person puts out a year and how many citations they get. And it's the main author, I believe. Don't quote me on this. I haven't pulled up the information to verify, but I'm quite certain that it's the lead author who gets the majority of the credit. Now, how do you determine that? This can be done in a number of different ways, obviously communicating and collaborating with the people that you're co-authoring with. It could be as easy as saying whoever wants to be the corresponding author. that would be the person who's responsible to field any contact after it has been published. So if people want to contact you and ask questions, or to cite something, or to use a figure, table, or piece of data, an image that is contained in that article, someone needs to take responsibility for that. That could be a determining factor. But it becomes even more complex when people are building their career around the number of citations that they're getting, and the number of articles that they are the lead author or head author on. So what has ended up happening is there's something called the Vancouver Protocol, which is a good way to diffuse a lot of these problems that can arise based off of who should be a co-author. So I'm going to skip off of the topic of the lead author, because you kind of need to figure that out for yourself. And that's probably the person who is going to take all of the responsibility, not just for corresponding, but for formatting, for submitting, for holding contact with the publisher, going through the motions. But who is an author on a paper? And if you look especially at some of the international work on things like climate change or global ecological environmental change, there can be up to 100 people listed as authors on some of these papers. So how do you determine who is relevant or not? And there's been this agreement, which is now collectively known as the Vancouver Protocol, which is currently the best tool that we have, and something that I always point people towards, whose name gets listed on these peer-reviewed papers. Well, it comes down to 4 criteria. The first one being every person who is named needs to have a substantial contribution to the conception or design of the work, or the acquisition, analysis, or interpretation of the data for the work. So that's a
substantial
big group of people. Exactly. That is not specific. Now, this is why it's important that you apply all 4 criteria, because while the word substantial contribution is a bit wishy-washy and vague, that's only one of 4 things that needs to be checked off. So you can determine that yourself, but because it's not just a substantial contribution, you also have to have been involved in drafting the work or revising it critically for important intellectual content. Okay, now what does that mean? That's also open for interpretation.
Sure.
Which means,
but it gets more. But you have to be involved from start to finish. That's pretty obvious.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then it comes down to, you also need to approve the final version to be published. So if you are one author who says, no, I disagree, I don't think that I want this to be published, and you're the minority, and everyone decides for it to be published, hey, too bad your name isn't going to be listed.
Yeah.
And the final criteria is agreement to be accountable for all aspects of the work in ensuring that questions related to the accuracy or integrity of any part of that work are appropriately investigated and resolved. So this means you're going to be responsible for any follow-up, not just the corresponding author.
But also any other people's research that you have worked together with. And
yes.
To be realistic, there's probably a bunch of different projects that could have had more authors, but they for some reason decided to, you know what, I don't want my name to be a part of this project because of some kind of issue.
Yeah. So let's say that you were involved in a project as an analyst. And that's all that you did. You just got data, you analyzed it, you provided results and an interpretation. You were involved in drafting that work to make sure that the results were accurately presented. And you gave final approval to the publication, but you decide you don't want to be held accountable for any of this work if it is criticized, if it is removed or revoked, that you don't want to be involved in any of that. You will not be named a co-author under the Vancouver Protocol. So even though the Vancouver Protocol has a lot of vague language as to what is a substantial contribution or an important intellectual contribution, to be accountable for all aspects in ensuring accuracy and integrity, you have to go through all 4 of those to end up being an author. So you're kind of making the claim that I'm willing to stick with this, and I'm willing to support it and back it up and strengthen it or revise it if it is found to be untrue or false in any sort of situation.
This is a digression, but you think that people have decided that, you know what, I don't want to be responsible for this. Please take my name off the paper because they're afraid of the political consequences of the content.
That is possible.
Or how it might be used, how it might be contextualized.
Mm-hmm. And another reason this came up is because I've heard, not from my own experience, but from other professors, where they have suddenly found their name on something that has become published because they had been, say, a supervisor to a Ph.D. or a master's student. And that person, the author of the thesis or the dissertation, decided, well, I want my supervisor's name to be a co-author on this because they were my supervisor and they helped me a lot with this. But the author of that paper never contacted and consulted with that professor to see if it was okay. So this suddenly gets you into can get people into sticky situations where there's the assumption that they are a co-author because they had some kind of contribution, which is why this Vancouver Protocol is also there.
I've actually heard some examples of kind of the other way around, that let's say that you or me wrote an article, and then a person would say, okay, but I want to be co-author on this one because we had a conversation about this topic 2 years ago. And let's say that this person it usually happens if one of the people are an academic superstar, right?
Yeah.
So they get placed as a co-author on multiple different works, and then it looks like they're publishing tons of stuff, but in reality, that might not be the case.
Mm-hmm. Other people are doing the work and a lot of the writing, and they're just submitting it and sticking their name on as the head author.
Yeah, because
maybe they led the project. Who knows?
Maybe they did, and in some cases they probably did, and in some cases they probably didn't. I mean, we just have to be realistic here.
It gets pretty gray. This is an incredibly gray area very quickly, which again is so important that these sorts of goals, objectives, roles, and responsibilities are identified early on in the process, and maybe even have a contingency plan for what happens if the lead or head author decides to step down for some reason. They retire, they become ill, they perish possibly, or they just decide they no longer want to be involved in this for any number of reasons. Having a contingency to see, well, how would this move forward in an event like that can be a valuable tool, which has nothing to do with writing. It has everything to do with just managing the project.
And that can also happen with students that decide to work on a group project together. Suddenly someone drops the course or has decided to do something different. I mean, what I'm trying to do now is that we've been talking about professional researchers, but there's a lot of people that listen to this podcast which is a few years away from being a professional researcher, and they might write a thesis together or a term paper. So do we have any smart strategies or tools that they could use in order to divide different tasks and organize their work?
Yeah, and I think that when we get into maybe some of these methods now, how you can actually do this work, this is applicable to professional researchers as well. But in the case of, say, somebody dropping a course, you're a bachelor or a master's student working on a group assignment, easiest thing to do is immediately go speak with the professor, the course responsible, and inform them of what has happened and see what alternatives exist. Because if you were expected as a group of 5 to produce a 25-page paper, well, that's 5 pages per person. Is the professor going to expect a 25-page paper still, or are they going to expect a 5-page paper, minus 5 pages, so a 20-page paper.
Yeah.
Or maybe will they be willing to give you 1 extra week or something? And this will vary, circumstance to circumstance. So the first thing to do would go and see if there's a way to rectify the problem directly with the person responsible for the course. Hopefully it's not a matter of picking up slack. It's a matter of having something adjusted to a changed situation.
I also think that this sounds a little strange, but I think each group should create some kind of a contract. To at least to a certain degree, because, I mean, I've heard it's not like it happens all the time, but there is people that have been put in a really difficult situation because someone just decided to drop the course, or I think my wife actually told me about a friend of hers that were writing her bachelor's thesis together with a fellow student, and this fellow student suddenly decided to, you know what, I don't think I want to be I don't want to work with you anymore, like at the end of the project.
Mm-hmm.
So suddenly both of them lacked 50% of the thesis.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not saying that these scenarios happen a lot, but it can happen. So it's smart to create some kind of a contract and find people within your course that has some of the same schedule as you. That means that I have a kid. You don't have a kid. Maybe we wouldn't be the best match, right? Because if I'm a student, maybe I have to work at night, but you can work during the day. So then maybe we were not meant for each other.
Yeah.
When it comes to group work.
That's a really good idea. It is just a matter of clarifying the specific goals and roles and responsibilities so that there's accountability. I hate to say it because, I think that students work hard, but there are definitely people who look at a lot of group work as like, oh, whatever, it's not that important. I don't really care to contribute. They're late. The contribution that they give is just something like maybe straight up plagiarism or at a very
or just completely wing it.
Yeah, subpar standard, as you could say, a day late and $1 short, that they're not on time and they don't pull their weight. And what is it that you do? I've been in those circumstances where it became a bit apparent, and so I just talked with everybody and we made the agreement that we're going to take this to the professor for just a class, right? We're going to take it to the professor and let them know, and we're probably just not going to include that person in it. That student has to make it up to the professor. But in a thesis situation, that's something a lot different. So you should have a more definitive contract. You should have a clear agreement and some kind of a contingency plan. Bring your supervisor in on it and get some opinions from them. They might have some real life experience, and it's going to differ from person to person and group to group and project to project. Is it possible that you can supplement it and do an extended literature review as part of it to make up for the information that is lacking? Is it possible to get an extension? Is that a suitable situation where you could justify getting an extension to conduct the extra research that the other party abandoned? We can't really give you a good answer to that because it's going to depend on the situation. It's going to depend on the timeline, the budget,
But there is certain things that you can do. You can try to find other students that have some of the same schedule as you. And I'm not just talking about being a parent or not. It could also be, let's say that one student that you kind of maybe want to work with has 2 different jobs. They don't have that much free time. Then, things can get a little bit complicated. So it's important to talk about all these things in advance and kind of map out how much time you actually have. And then you could start forming groups. And I also think we talked about this before during the time management episode, but we talked about the Eisenhower matrix. That could also be a nice little tool. I'm just going to share my screen because I pulled it up. Let me just see here. There, we got it.
And this, I think we were talking about the Eisenhower matrix in relation to individual work, but this is almost more important in a co-authorship
and
situation.
Much better because we talked about it with individual work, and then we have, let me just walk you through it. Eisenhower matrix, for those of you who are listening, is 4 different boxes, and they have one says do it now, another one says schedule a time to do it, a third one says delegate it, who can do it for you, and the last one is delete it. And then these different boxes is put into what can you call it, like a matrix? Like
it's a matrix with 4 quadrants. On the y-axis, from the bottom, it is not important, and the upper y-axis is important. And on the x-axis, in the start on the left side, it is urgent, and over to the right, it is not urgent. So you separate this into these 4 quadrants of important, not important, urgent, or not urgent.
Basically, you just let's say they have 10 different tasks. It could be 10 different sections of a paper, or 10 different aspects of your project that needs to be done. And then you can, okay, let us look at this first thing. We need to do some kind of experiment in the laboratory. Okay, is it urgent? Yes. It is important for our research? Yes. Then do it now.
Mm-hmm.
Or if it's not urgent, if you can wait a couple of months with doing it, you need to do some, let's say you need to finish up the literature review first, or something like that, then you could schedule it. And then it's all about, looking at your calendar, finding a time. Maybe you have to book time at the laboratory in advance. I know a lot of these different machines are quite popular at NMU,
Mm-hmm.
so you probably need to be quick, and book in advance. And then we also have the delegated. That's if it's not important,
But urgent.
But urgent. And then if you work together as a group, then this one it's actually possible.
Yeah.
I mean,
who has the time to do it now?
Yeah, because there might be different people that working at different sections, and one of them might be done. They've already written their part, and yeah, sure, I can do that part, no problem. I can find that specific book. I can create the literature list, whatever it is. And when we talked about this, we talked about this in relation to individual work, we kind of had a little bit of a laugh, because
hire a secretary, right?
Yeah, it's like this system is called the Eisenhower matrix, and it's named after the late president Eisenhower.
Mm-hmm.
And he obviously had the opportunity to delegate tasks to his staff, which most people don't have. They don't have a staff, but when you work together as a group, then that's an actual possibility. So, and then last, if it's not urgent and it's not important, then just eliminate the task. You don't need it.
Clear off. So having a tool like this is very powerful. Having some kind of a regular scheduled meetup, I find, is also quite helpful. And it doesn't need to be long. And this is quite good for time management. If you can arrange to have a 30 to 45 minute meeting every week, and no longer than that, because you can then really start to inform people, hey, we're way off task here. Let's focus. We all have other things that we need to do. I think a lot of meetings generally are way longer than they need to be, because people come in unprepared. They don't have good bullet points to talk about. And it's different if it's a planning meeting where it's about generating ideas.
Yeah, it's like a
Those will
brainstorming
take longer.
session. That's different. Sure.
And that should happen early on, along with all these defining goals and roles and objectives and responsibilities. But as you get further into the project, where people are starting to fulfill their roles and responsibilities, those meetings should become a lot shorter. Where are we? Is anybody behind? What are the tasks that need to be done this week so that we can move on to the next part? Where are you in your own work schedule? Does anybody have a scheduling conflict? Those sorts of things, to just deal with the day-to-day,
I also think there's another important aspect of that, because, just as if you've been in a meeting for 3 hours, I mean, it takes a toll on you. Try to keep the meeting short and concrete and as concise as possible, and then people get a little bit fired up. Oh, I know what I'm going to do, and then you could, then you have some extra energy that you can actually spend on working on the project, instead of just being tired after a 3-hour-long meeting, and you just need to eat, take a break, relax, sleep, whatever. Then you could use that excess energy to actually work on the project.
Yeah.
Because then you have all the ideas.
This also comes down to realizing how to manage time in a group versus what is something that can be communicated to an individual. And if you are working very closely with one other person in a larger group of, say, 3 or 5 or whatever the number is, maybe a group meeting is not the time to talk to that one individual about the things that the two of you are going to end up needing to do.
Save it for later.
Do it later. The group time is about the collective unit as a whole. The one-on-one can be done by email, a phone call, a face-to-face at a later time. Yeah.
Small details can be saved for later. And one other important thing, people are probably doing this, but since March, a lot of us has been home, and we have to talk to each other, and we have to have all these big meetings. So we use a platform like Zoom or Microsoft Teams, like we use right now. That was almost like a commercial for Microsoft.
We're waiting for our royalty check to come in for that.
But the point is that you can schedule these group meetings with your, but you have to use one of these platforms. And then you could also use the share screen function, and then you could walk through a section of the text or the entire text, sentence by sentence, if you want to, together. And then you could highlight different things. And there's lots of things that you could do to a document with the share function. You can highlight stuff.
And work collaboratively. That is a big thing too. A lot of people will pull up Microsoft Word or Notepad, and like that's all well and good. But if you're working as a group, have a shared platform where the individual research is accessible to everybody.
And a shared document so everybody can make changes. This is something that we did for the project that I was working on. We had like a shared document with lots of different headings and subheadings, and then we would just put in different information and just write and help each other out and alter each other's texts and stuff like that. And then we had these meetings, so talk about the changes that we done and the different contributions.
So I think I've got a horror story time.
Oh.
Ooh, yeah. So I love story time, but this is definitely the nightmare situation. A few years ago, when I was running workshops, if we all remember when we could gather together in large groups of people and sit,
vaguely.
Yeah, in that
like
long distant past, a millennia ago. I was doing a workshop for some PhDs, and we were looking over some principles of writing. I don't remember exactly what it was, and it's not important, but one of the PhDs was there, and she was looking very stressed. And I had asked her, like, what's going on? What are you looking for in this workshop? Well, I'm on revision number 70 of this article that I'm co-authoring, and I'm starting to go crazy. It's like, you have revised this 70 times. How? Like, how does it get to that? She was working on an individual Word document, sending the file by email to all of the different co-authors and receiving their comments individually. They weren't
making changes.
And then making changes and sending it back and then getting 70, however many different...
that takes forever.
Yes. There was no collaboration at all. There was no... Obviously, these people were not reading each other's comments. They were not working together to try to make a paper. I don't think in any circumstance a paper needs to be revised 70 times. It does need to be revised. It will need to be updated and edited and changed. That's normal, but like 70 is insane. And she was going crazy because she wasn't...
So much back and forth.
Yeah. So have documents that can be looked at by everybody, that can be commented on by everybody, so everybody can read what everybody else is saying, and join this with meetings where you can talk through the bigger issues.
And it's also nice to have like a chat, right?
Yeah.
So all small things people can write in the chat, and then you could have meetings where you talk to each other face to face. It doesn't matter if you use if it's digitally or if it's like in the flesh, if you actually meet each other. But all these small things like small edits and stuff like that could just be written in the chat, and then someone goes into the document, makes the alteration, and then just tells the other people that what they did. I mean, imagine how much time she would have saved if they had a shared document.
Yes. And I think it was because of her and that experience that I had over several workshops and consultations with her to try to help her out. I'm pretty sure that she was the one who kickstarted my development of the revision roadmap, which I'm sorry, I didn't think that I was going to need this, so I don't have it pulled up on the screen. But in our SWR 100 for NMBU employees and students, you can find this in Canvas Scientific Writing Resource Portal 100. But the revision roadmap was basically a way of realizing that the type of feedback that you're getting as you're working on co-authored documents, or even on a document you're working on yourself but have multiple supervisors, it's very important for you to know what feedback you need at different stages of revision so that you're not trying to do these fine detail, minuscule, bits of like, oh, you need an apostrophe here, place a comma, this shouldn't be a hyphen, it should be a colon. That sort of stuff is unhelpful if you're still working on improving the structure.
A lot of these things is stuff that you know you're going to do anyways.
Exactly.
Later, so it's completely useful to get any kind of feedback focused on that.
So the revision roadmap is a way of breaking down the stages of revision into much more manageable tasks, but it's important that you share that as you're collaboratively working on these documents. So if you're at the stage where it's more or less finalized and you're actually, there's no new information that you think is needed, you can start working on the whole document together. Everyone should be on the same page of what it is that you're revising for. So first, we're going to revise for structure. The first thing we need to do is, can everybody make a reverse outline so that we can talk about, do we have a logical structure and clear transitions across every paragraph and every section? Are we repeating ourselves anywhere? Are we missing any information that needs to be added, and where would that go? Getting everybody on the same page is a great way that the feedback you do get from multiple different perspectives is constructive and not destructive, that you end up producing 70 different revisions because everyone's looking at different
focused things. Yeah. And I think just talking about students, let's say that they're supposed to do some kind of group work, writing a text together, and then the professor or someone like, okay, so who's going to do what? And then I've seen this happen a lot of times. One person is like, I can do that part, and then the rest of the group is a little bit unsure. They don't really know what they want to focus on. And then you could ask like, okay, but who's good at writing? Let's say that you want to try to find a person that could be the editor. Like who's good at writing? And then let's say that there's no one. Like no one is volunteering. No one is confident in their own abilities. Then I think the revision roadmap is a very good resource, because then they could have this set up in the way that they meet up together, and then they walk through the text sentence by sentence, but with the use of the revision roadmap. I think that could be a good approach.
Exactly. Now, for those of you who are listening who maybe don't have access to Canvas or are unfamiliar with SWR100, we have a walkthrough. It's on our YouTube channel, NMBU Writing Center Revision Roadmap. So if you actually just type into an internet search engine, NMBU Writing Center, YouTube, Revision Roadmap. I'll try to remember to link it in the show description as well. But I walk through the whole process, why it's important, how it is helpful, how you can use it. And when it comes to this sort of co-authorship, especially as you're getting to that final stage of revision and editorial work, it's really important that everybody can focus on the same task to prevent whoever is responsible for compiling all of this and doing the writing, that they aren't getting, a million different conflicting sources of information about what to do. And it walks you through also, sort of working from these big tasks down to the smaller formatting issues, so that you have a focus through each revision that you make, and you only focus on one task at a time until it's done. Then you move on to the next task and you start the process over again, looking at a different aspect of it.
And I think that is especially powerful when working together as a group, because then let's say that you're going to walk through, like look at each sentence, then a lot of people could point out different things, but it would be a lot easier if you have one specific thing that you had decided to focus on. So let's say it would be a logical flow or cohesion. That's what we're going to focus on today. Mm-hmm. Then all these different perspectives and ideas would be a lot easier to alter the text, to make changes.
It gets easier
because
in those.
It is more focused.
Yeah, it gets easier in the meetings if you're collaboratively revising the document together, to say that's irrelevant. We're not focusing on that. But it's a good idea, so write it down and save it for later, and we'll deal with it later. And same thing, it's very useful for you if you are the person who's taking the kind of editor responsibility and doing this individually based off of written comments, that you can start categorizing this feedback and say, this is based on clarity, this is based on precision, so that you eliminate those. You don't get rid of them, but you don't deal with them until you're at the stage where you're ready to deal with them. And that way it doesn't bog you down. You can see massive changes in the writing occur very quickly, and you can send it back. And then maybe people change their opinions. Maybe some of those ideas that were originally written there are less important than they first seemed to that author, to the person doing the review.
And I think it's kind of like taking on different pairs of glasses for each time that you meet up together. And okay, now everybody put on their clarity glasses. Let's look at each sentence and if they are as clear as possible. And I kind of like that approach. And I think that's the best approach if there is no, if you haven't divided roles, because that's also a possible way to do it. But I think that's better if the participants is more used to group work and has done it before. And if it's kind of unfamiliar to you, then you should do everything as a more of a collaborative effort. You can write each section individually, but go do the revision together.
So what can be some of our takeaways? Because we've covered a lot of ground so far.
I think that we could start with students first. Try to find people that have more or less the same schedule as you and create some kind of a contract. Think about this as a job, not as being a student. I think that's the most important aspect here. Then you could use all different kinds of systems like the Eisenhower matrix or a Gantt chart or both if you want to, just to really create visible plan for what you're going to do, and with buffer periods and all different kinds of stuff. And when it comes to professional research, there's different ways to do it. There's no one way that I think is better than you just have to feel it out a little bit. What have the team done before? What do you think?
Yeah, I would say much the same. Have a pretty clearly defined and unified goal for what the project is going to be. Clearly define the objectives, and that then helps you to identify what are your specific roles and responsibilities. Define what the scheduling is going to be so that everybody is, working on a shared timeline with room for buffers. Use a Gantt chart and leave buffer times so that you can kind of all be hitting deadlines around the same time. There's going to be a lot of what you do is really just going to be personality management, time management, task management before it comes to writing.
A lot of coordinating.
Yeah. Learn about the tools of collaboration, shared documents through, Microsoft Office
Very
online,
important.
Google
Very
Docs,
important.
something like that. Keep things regularly updated and everybody connected. Have regular meetings that are short and to the point, that keep everybody on task for where you should be in your schedule. And like you say too, it's going to be a matter of figuring it out, because every individual is different, every group dynamic is different, every project is different.
And disciplines are different.
Yes.
As you talked about in one of the previous examples, maybe that there's an analyst whose only job is to analyze results and then send that back to the rest of the team. I mean, not every research project is like that. Sometimes all of the different people are almost involved in every aspect of the research. So it's hard to kind of say that there's one way and one way only. There is infinite variations, and you just have to feel people out a little bit, I think. But it's important to put your ego aside. That's I think that's important.
That's a big part of it.
Yeah.
And I would say the last thing is use the NMBU Writing Center, the services that we offer. Book a one-on-one digital consultation. Get in touch with us to find out how you can access SWR 100 to learn about some of the very practical, useful ideas like the revision roadmap and how you can improve clarity, cohesion, concision. Use the resources that are there. We're here to help. We're here to help across disciplines. We're here to help across research levels, study levels. And I think if you can take a lot of this stuff, use the services that are there, the ideas that are there, and form it around what you're after, it's going to be all right.
It is, but you have to put your ego aside.
That's it. You're not writing an autobiography,
No. I was waiting for that. First, I wasn't really sure if you were, is it time for the ending now? It's getting very close, and it's like then it's.
I had to
was a
plug
good
us
one.
first. It's important to plug that,
Very
especially this time of
important.
year, because a lot of students, you're into the thick of it. In the upcoming weeks, your assignments are going to be due. Master's students, now is a good time to get started on your thesis.
So
Come
that's it.
come
Another.
down, get in touch with us. NMBU Writing Center at Writing Center at nmbu.no.
Yeah.
NMBU Writing Center has our own YouTube channel. We have a Facebook page. We have a web page through the nmbu.no university website as well.
And we also have the resource portal on Canvas.
Yes.
So that's also us. Something that we have made. So, okay, another podcast from the Norwegian University of Life Sciences. That's the first time we ever said anything like that, isn't it? I don't know.
Yeah, it's taken us long enough.
Taking us
Anyways.
long enough. Okay.
Nicholas, good seeing you again. Look forward to the next one in a couple of weeks. And listeners, don't be shy. Let us know what you're wondering about, and we can let you know with the infinitely deep well of wisdom that is the internet that we pull our resources from.
And we're not afraid to touch or talk about the same topic multiple times, but just from a slightly different angle. Because we have to be honest with each other. This is also something that, it's going to happen at some point. We've been analyzing articles. We could do that again. Just please reach out to us, send us an email, ask for different things that you want us to talk about, and we will happily talk about it. Okay.
Sounds
it's
good.
Over.
Thanks for listening.